Well, I apologize for missing a video last week. We have battled snow and wind and rain and sleet and mud, and we've been super busy doing some other things on the farm. But we're back at it, and we've got some good progress to report on. Our builder decided to take advantage of this beautiful weather that we had because we have a storm coming in soon. So he went ahead and built the roof for the larder and the root cellar and set the pillars for the mudroom and the porch, or the foundations for those pillars. Now, building this root cellar roof started with the 2x6s that I had milled on the lumber mill, and then he braced those from below with 2x4s, also from my lumber mill, that were in the back because he didn't want to use these studs. So then he put plywood on top of that, and then from there he put rebar in a grid pattern. And that grid pattern was tied together with wire, and then it tied right into the rebar that was coming out of the house. And remember, he had cut away the foam in order to expose the concrete, so this fresh concrete ties right into the concrete in the house, and the rebars are tied together so they all link together, as well as on the end here, there were rebar stubs sticking out of this end wall that are tied into that also. So everything is one complete unit. So the thickness of this roof is roughly 7 inches on the bottom, about 6 inches on top. It's at least 6 inches throughout. Now, our builder was experienced in making box culverts for the state for highways and roads. And so they would use 8-inch on top and then put the pavement on top of that, and trucks and semis and stuff would drive over it. So we don't intend to have any traffic over this, but it is clearly plenty thick for our storm shelter. And of course, this will be backfilled with dirt, but we're gonna wait some time before that to allow it to cure. It takes about 28 days for a full cure. And every day you wait, the stronger it gets. So Danielle encouraged me to do the filming inside the larder, and I'm a little nervous because there's about 20,000 pounds of concrete above my head right now. But because we started from scratch, we tried to make everything in this house as efficient as possible. My grandmother's house had a larder and a root cellar in the basement, and it was built in the 1800s. So we went back to that design and modernized it a bit by adding a wallapini on the south side. So in the wintertime, all food production is in the wallapini, all food storage is on the north side in the larder and the root cellar. So we come directly from the basement into the larder, and there will be a door right in front of me that will actually lead outside. So when we harvest from the gardens, we don't have to go through the house. We can come directly from the outside through clamshell doors down into the root cellar and store all our crops. And the other great advantage of having that outdoor access is a storm shelter. In the summertime, when we have thunderstorms and tornadoes, we can easily open those clamshell doors and get down into the storm shelter extremely quickly without having to go through the house. Well, I'm standing where the mudroom is going to be. This is a primary entrance to the house for us because we'll be going between the barn, and we want to keep the house nice and clean. So this is our big mudroom in the back with all our 20 pair of boots. And these are actually the concrete pillars that are going to be poured to set the floor on, and below those are big square footer pads of concrete. Now we're on the main guest entrance side of the house, and actually right here is the summer kitchen. The entryway is over here as you drive up in the driveway, and just behind me is the main door that goes into the dining room. Again, concrete footers below these pillars, and then the deck on top of that. Looking out, a beautiful view over the pond.
Okay, so it looks like we're ready for pour number 2, the upper floor. And this is our last pour, so hopefully this one counts. Now, these big windows are slightly different than the ones down below because they're really big and the gaps between them are relatively small. So we talked about how in the basement he tried to put those 2x4s far enough in such that there wasn't a bulge in the middle, but this time he decided to use plywood all around the outside and brace that to keep a nice flat surface so that those butt blocks don't bulge out. The other thing, on another build that he did a while ago, he had a thin pillar like this between a window and a door, and he found that after the pour, it actually twisted a little bit. Not enough to be a big deal, but he didn't like the fact that it moved. So if you see up here, there are 2x6s tying all these windows together or tying the columns together so there's no twisting. And there's plywood here or OSB here, here, and on the outside. So these are really gusseted up, very strong, so that there's no twisting or movement when that concrete goes in there. One thing about an ICF house, you kind of have to make decisions about penetrations, because once they pour that concrete, it's really tough to get through it. Now there are tools that'll get through it, but it's a lot better to do it before the pour. We had a lot of discussion about where this dryer vent was going to go, and well, now that we made a decision, it's right there. But it's essentially just a 4-inch PVC stuck through the wall, and if you don't want to use it, you can fill it with foam, but we wanted to have that here, there just in case. Now, we're not going to have a standard dryer, but we don't want in the future to say that we can never have a dryer, so we've got a vent tube there anyway. We are now inside the larder. He has peeled off all the plywood and all the supports from inside here. It's been about a week since we poured, and it's looking really, really good. Now on top of this larder, there will be waterproofing, a dimple membrane, and the tar paper that's on the side of the house also, because we don't want leaks coming down here through the wall or any cracks up on the top there. So it will be fully sealed before it's backfilled. Well, the verdict is in. This bracing that we used with the OSB all around, first of all, it did keep the columns from twisting with these 2x6s up here by tying them all together. Also, we used 2x4s with OSB sheets on the inside to keep that very flat. We have no bowing right there on the butt block. So that certainly worked very well, and it's a very cost-effective way to keep that frame in. Now, one thing I did not mention on a previous video, and I should here, is these large holes in the windowsill. Now downstairs there were much smaller windows and there was only one hole, but these holes were actually there for the builder to watch the concrete flow under the sill. And he also took his vibrator and stuck it in there to vibrate that concrete and allow it to flow and totally fill up down here, because you do not want any voids. And then as soon as he saw it get up here, he was able to move on to the next pillar and the next and the next. And that makes sure you've got a complete concrete fill below those sills. So now we're on the very top of the structure, and you'll notice that the top of this pour is slightly different from the previous pour. The previous pour was recessed, it was very rough, it had rebar sticking out of it because it had to tie in to this pour. Well, now we have to tie this concrete structure into the wood structure above it. But first, let's look at some other things. This string here gives them a perfectly straight wall all the way down. But they did that before the pour using the plumb jacks, and then they did it after the pour, because the wall can move slightly when you dump several tons of concrete into a styrofoam wall. And it did a little bit, and they had to do some adjustments, but they went right back to making it perfectly straight. Then they smoothed off this top, and when the concrete was thick enough to hold them, they put in these anchor bolts. These anchor bolts will be bolted into the piece of wood that sits on top of this, and then allows them to build the wood structure above it, which is the roof and the gable ends. So something I want to point out if you're going to be doing an ICF home. First of all, controlling that concrete hose is not an easy thing. And when that happens, sometimes some of the concrete will spill over the wall. Now on the first pour, not a big deal because it was falling on gravel or dirt outside. But now that we had some of the structure up and we had a beautiful finished concrete floor in the basement and in the Wallapini, some of that sloshing needed to be cleaned up immediately. You'll see above my head that some of it came over and hit some of the bracing. Now when it fell inside, it could come down here and hit the subfloor and you'd have these chunks of concrete. And we tried to clean those up pretty quickly and just throw them out into the dirt. More importantly, if it fell to the outside of this wall, it falls right onto the finished floor of the Wallapini. And we really wanted to clean that up because you don't want to have to chisel concrete off the floor later on.
Well, thanks again for joining us on our journey. If you subscribed, thank you very much for the comments and the questions. I've been able to go to the builder and ask a few things and learn things myself. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and join us as we continue to build this ICF house.